I love Outer Wilds. The game's unique gameplay, cozy campfire aesthetic, and beautiful soundtrack all contribute to this love. But what really cements this game's place in my mind is its story, and how it uses its other aspects all in service of the story. The physics and time loop mechanics, as well as Andrew Prowlow's soundtrack, perfectly demonstrate this union of story and gameplay. But plenty of people have already praised these aspects of the game. Instead, I want to talk about the game's use of horror elements, how it uses different fears and dread to immerse the player in its world, as well as heighten the impact of its story and themes. I want to talk about the beautiful horror of Outer Wilds. More so than any other game, Outer Wilds is something you can only experience once in your life. Therefore, I cannot stress enough that if you haven't played the game before, you should do so immediately before going any further into this video. For the sake of my professor, and anyone that ignores my warning, however, it is important to give a rundown of the game. In Outer Wilds, the player takes control of a four-eyed alien, known as a Harthian, as they explore a series of planets in a small solar system in a questionably put-together spaceship. On these planets is a series of ruins left by a long-dead race called the Nomai, who left many experiments behind, one of which has the player stuck in a time loop, which is restarted each time they die. The game is largely open-ended, with the player choosing where to go and when. They can choose to focus on fixing their situation, discovering more about the Nomai, or even just hunting down their fellow astronauts. One of the game's biggest features, though, is the unique aspect of each of the planets, and how these aspects also lend themselves to the fear and dread that I love about the game. The Hourglass Twins' shifting sands leading to claustrophobia, Giant Steep's vast ocean feeding into my thalassophobia, and Dark Bramble's whole situation are just a few of the examples. The two that stand out to me, though, are the Stranger from the game's DLC and the game's Son. The first thing that greets you at the start of the game's DLC, Echoes of the Eye, is a simple warning that achieves two things. At face value, it informs the player of an option within the game menu, but it also functions to put the player in a state of dread and anxiety. At some point or another, this DLC will warrant a reduced frights mode, and that is a powerful thought, one that sticks in the mind of the player and makes the initial discovery of the hidden planet, the Stranger, that much more effective. This setup is also important because it changes the context of every little thing you do on this new planet. Abandoned homes become haunted structures, family portraits become unsettling observers, and leftover slideshows become an insight into a hostile alien species. This recontextualization is in big contrast to the Nomai ruins we are used to, where we once read leftover notes and conversations between friends and family. We now get untranslatable symbols and purposefully burned slide reels. Our fears, for once, are given a face, so with each new piece of info and each new slide, this fear and dread of the game fulfilling its promise and you meeting the species grows. And when you do finally discover the secret of the Stranger and journey into its crypts, you find that reality is much worse. Beyond acting as an obstacle to furthering the plot, though, the fear these aliens elicit also serve to create a divide between us and them. Just as the aliens have grown cold and afraid of the outside world, the player grows cold and afraid of them. All of this culminates in the end of the DLC, when we finally open a giant sarcophagus the outsiders locked away. The game builds tension as we step inside a dark observatory and make our way to an abandoned lantern. Instead of finding some new horror, though, we are met with another alien, one who is more interested in conversation rather than snuffing out our lantern. It is at this moment, where I sat sharing my memories and conversing with one of these aliens for the first time, that I realized what the game had done. The same fears these people that control them and led to their isolation are the exact fears I had developed towards them through the course of my exploration. And that shared fear is what really conveys the message of the DLC. It's easy to grow distrustful, to lock ourselves away from reality, and to remain nostalgic for the past. But in doing so, we risk losing out on the future and on building new paths and relationships, like the one we build with the prisoner. Ultimately, Echoes of the Eye ends with a choice. to let the prisoner add his people's music to our campfire, or to let their culture and past die away due to our fear. And while it is a choice, the game's effectiveness at conveying its message by putting us in the outsider's shoes means I've yet to see anyone I have shown this game refuse the prisoner's place at the campfire. One of the first big surprises of Outer Wilds is finding out there's a time limit, as your sun, after about 22 minutes, goes supernova. This event is the call to action, as our goals quickly shift from fun exploration to trying to save our solar system, and it is this goal that drives a very large portion of the game. So when you follow countless leads to their inevitable dead ends, all to find out that there is no fixing the sun, and that not only is our sun going out, but every single sun throughout the universe is too, things get bleak. The way the game was headed messed with me, and it brought out a lot of my anxieties, specifically with the existential horror that was all going to end one day. All the time I had spent, everything I discovered would ultimately result in nothing, just as it had with the Nomai, and just as it had with the stranger. Except for one other, I was alone, stuck in an eternal time loop, constantly reminded of my inability to do anything. The game wasn't making use of the normal scares we usually think of, like it did with the Echoes of the Eye, but the anxiety it conveyed was accomplishing the same effect. But rather than some enemy or threat becoming my obstacle, it was the game itself, and I nearly left the game for good. But I didn't. Instead, I traveled the solar system, drifting from planet to planet, not in some desperate search for a solution, but for a purpose. Talking with everyone and rereading leftover Nomai messages, I slowly began to understand. My character wasn't being cheated out of a life. Their journey hadn't been cut short. In fact, it had been extended, and instead of wasting our time panicking, we should have been busy living. And the anxiety I felt was key to reaching this conclusion. If instead the game had allowed me to save the day, I don't think this game would have helped my anxiety as much as it really did. Only through my fear was the game able to really tell its story. So without any further prodding by the game, I took out the power source from my loop, and decided to make use of the extra time that had been given to me, and journeyed to the eye of the universe. The end of Outer Wilds is both deeply depressing and abundantly positive. The game takes the time to both present one last chilling environment, while also reminding us what it was all for. Searching for our friends in a dark forest, the dread and anxiety don't dissipate, but the game knows that. We can't just get rid of our fears, but we can make sure that they don't overtake us. And there, sitting at a tiny campfire at the edge of all time and space, surrounded by familiar faces as the coming end loomed over us, I finally, truthfully, felt hopeful.